The look on my mother's face when I slid that document across the dinner table is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because it made me feel powerful, not because I had planned it that way, but because in that single moment, everything I had quietly endured for the past decade finally made sense. Before I tell you how that night unfolded, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. And if you have ever had a family member treat your hard work like it was their personal safety net, give this video a like because you are going to want to stick around for this one. I am 31 years old and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized accounting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have spent the better part of my adult life being the responsible one, the steady one, the one who always had a plan. My younger brother is 26. And for as long as I can remember, he has been the one who never needed a plan because the rest of us were always willing to provide one for him. Growing up, my parents were good people, hardworking, church-going, genuinely loving in the way that sometimes goes sideways when it is aimed unevenly. My father managed a hardware store, and my mother worked part-time as a dental hygienist. We were not wealthy by any stretch, but we were comfortable enough that nobody ever went without something they truly needed. The issue was never about money in our house. It was about the invisible scoreboard that only I seemed to notice. When I was 15, I started babysitting on weekends to save for my first laptop. I calculated what I needed, did the math on how many Saturdays it would take, and kept a little notebook tracking every dollar. My brother, 3 years younger than me, watched one Saturday as I counted my earnings at the kitchen table. He told my parents he wanted a gaming console. By the end of that month, it was sitting under the television. Nobody asked him to earn it. I do not say that to sound bitter. I say it because that pattern, small as it seemed then, became the blueprint for everything that followed. My parents helped me with some college expenses, but the majority of my education was funded through a combination of scholarships I applied for myself, a part-time job at the university library, and federal loans I spent years paying off. My brother enrolled in a technical program 2 years after I started college. My parents paid his tuition in full. When he dropped out after one semester because he decided the program was not for him, they shrugged it off. When I mentioned it once, gently, I was told that people find their paths at different paces and that I needed to be more understanding. I graduated, moved to Charlotte for a job opportunity, and started building something for myself with no blueprint and no net beneath me. My brother moved back into my parents' house, picked up part-time work at a sporting goods store, and spent most of his time talking about the business he was going to start someday. The business had a different name every few months depending on what he was most interested in at the time. It was never anything he actually started. 4 years ago, our grandmother passed away. She was my mother's mother, a woman who had grown up with very little and spent her life being careful with every resource she had. She owned a small house in Greensboro, about 90 minutes from Charlotte, that she had paid off decades ago. The house was not grand, but it was well maintained and sat on a quiet street with mature trees and good neighbors. She had lived there for 40 years. When her estate went through probate, the will was read and the house was left to me. I want to be clear about why, because I think it matters. My grandmother and I had been close in a way that went beyond holiday visits. I drove out to see her every few weeks during the last 5 years of her life. I helped her with her taxes, sat with her through 2 different medical procedures, and spent more than a few Sunday afternoons just keeping her company when the house felt too quiet. She told me once, plainly and without sentimentality, that she wanted the house to go to someone who understood what it meant to work for something. She said she trusted me to know what to do with it. My mother was not in the will, which my grandmother had made clear to her years before. My brother certainly was not. There was no ambiguity. The house went to me. What happened next was not immediate. At first, everyone accepted it with the surface-level grace that families perform at funerals. My mother said grandmother had always been fond of me. My brother said nothing at the reading but hugged me outside and said at least it stayed in the family. I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. About 3 weeks after the estate settled, my mother started a new habit of calling me every few days with comments worked into otherwise normal conversation. Things like how it was a shame the house was just sitting there empty, or how Greensboro had a lower cost of living than Charlotte, or how it might be good to have someone in the house to maintain it rather than leaving it vacant. I listened and said polite things and did not yet understand where all of it was going. My brother, around the same time, lost his job at the sporting goods store. The details came to me secondhand, but the summary was familiar. Some issue with his register being short more than once, and a manager who he said had never liked him. He was 26 years old, unemployed, and still living at my parents' house. My parents were worried, which meant they were also strategizing. I started to notice things. My brother texted me one afternoon asking if the Greensboro house had a garage and whether the neighborhood was walkable. A few days later, my mother mentioned that Greensboro had some good job opportunities in the trades, completely unprompted during a conversation about something else entirely. My aunt, my mother's older sister who lived 2 hours away, called me out of the blue for the first time in over a year and spent 20 minutes talking about how family needs to look out for each other. I told my closest friend about these conversations, and she said it sounded like they were building a case. I told her she was being dramatic. I was wrong. Here is what I had not told any of them. I had already been in contact with a real estate agent. The Greensboro house, as much as I appreciated what it represented, created a logistical problem for me. I lived 90 minutes away in a city where my career was established and my life was rooted. Managing a property from that distance meant either renting it out, which came with its own complications, or selling it and using the equity wisely. My grandmother had left it to me, and I felt the weight of that trust deeply. I wanted to honor it by making a thoughtful decision, not an emotional one. The agent I worked with was thorough and honest. She told me the market in that neighborhood was stronger than it had been in years, that the house would likely sell quickly given its condition and location, and that I could expect to walk away with a figure that would meaningfully change my financial position. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I looked at the numbers from every angle. I thought about what my grandmother had said about knowing what to do with it. And then I listed it. The house sold in 11 days. The buyers were a retired couple relocating from out of state, who wanted exactly what my grandmother's house offered: a quiet street, a manageable size, and a backyard with old trees. The closing was scheduled, and I signed everything with a mixture of grief and certainty that I recognized as the feeling of making the right, hard decision. I had not told my family any of this. The closing happened on a Thursday. That same Sunday, my parents had their regular monthly family dinner at their house in Raleigh. I had been looking forward to it with equal amounts of affection and dread, because something in the frequency of my mother's recent calls and the increasingly pointed questions from my brother had convinced me that this dinner was going to be something other than ordinary. I arrived at 6 in the evening. The house smelled like my mother's pot roast, which she made for occasions she considered significant. There were candles on the dining room table, which she only brought out for holidays and gatherings she wanted to feel ceremonial. My father was in his armchair watching a pregame show and greeted me with a long hug and a comment about how good it was to see me looking so well. My mother came out of the kitchen, held my face in both hands, and said I seemed tired and that I was working too hard. Both of them had the particular energy of people who know something is coming and are barely containing their anticipation. My brother arrived 20 minutes later. He was dressed more carefully than usual, a collared shirt instead of his standard hoodie, his hair combed back. He brought a bottle of sparkling cider and set it on the counter with the air of someone contributing to a celebration. He hugged me and said it was great to see me and asked how Charlotte was treating me. He was being warm in the careful, deliberate way people are warm when they want something from you. Dinner itself was a slow build. The conversation stayed light through the first half of the meal. My parents asked about my job and I answered. My brother talked about a potential job lead he was pursuing, details vague in the way his plans always were. My mother kept glancing at my father and then at my brother with the coded communication of people who have rehearsed something. Halfway through the meal, my mother set down her fork and folded her hands. She said she wanted to talk about the Greensboro house because they had been thinking about it as a family and felt like it deserved a real conversation. I said, of course, and kept eating. My father said that with grandmother gone, the house was a responsibility now, not just an asset, and that it made more sense for it to be lived in than to sit empty or be rented to strangers. My brother nodded along with the practiced gravity of a man attending a meeting he has already reviewed the agenda for. My mother then said that they had come up with what she called a wonderful solution. She looked at my brother when she said it, and he sat up slightly straighter, and in that moment I understood exactly what was about to happen. My brother cleared his throat and said that he had been thinking a lot about getting a fresh start. That Greensboro was a great city with real opportunities, and that he could be there in a week. He said he would take care of the property, maintain it, keep the lawn up, treat it with respect. He said it would be good for everyone because the house would have someone in it, and he would have the space to get his life together. He said grandmother would have wanted this. He said it was what family does. He said it with a smile that expected a matching smile from me. And I think somewhere in the architecture of his optimism, he genuinely believed he had solved a problem rather than announced a takeover. My mother was already nodding. She said it made so much sense when you thought about it, that the house was just sitting there and that my brother needed a stable foundation to build from, and that she knew I would understand because I had always been the thoughtful one. My father said something about the property taxes being a burden for someone who did not even live there and how having family in the house protected the investment. Nobody had asked me a single question this entire time. There was a pause, and all three of them looked at me with the warm, expectant faces of people awaiting enthusiastic agreement. I took a slow breath. I reached for my water glass, took a sip, and set it down carefully. Then I reached into the bag I had brought with me and removed a manila envelope that I placed flat on the table in front of me. I said, "I appreciate that you all thought about this. There is just one problem." My mother asked what the problem was. I said I sold the house last week. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It had texture to it. My mother's expression cycled through several emotions so quickly it was difficult to name them individually. My father set down his fork with a small click against the china. My brother's smile dissolved slowly, like something melting, and what replaced it was not quite anger yet. It was disbelief. I opened the envelope and laid the closing documents on the table. The deed transfer, the settlement statement, the confirmation of the wire. Everything was dated, notarized, and final. My brother said, "You are joking." I told him I was not joking and that the buyers were a lovely couple who planned to plant a garden in the backyard. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. She asked why I would do something like that without talking to the family first. She used the word family 3 times in the same sentence. I said, "The same way you all discussed my brother moving into my house without talking to me first." My father said that was different and I asked him how. He said they were trying to help. I said that making plans to give away something that belongs to me without my knowledge or consent is not help. It is assumption. My brother pushed his chair back from the table. He said I had done this on purpose, that I had heard something and sold the house specifically to block him. His voice was climbing, that particular register of someone who is not used to having plans disrupted. I told him I did not sell the house because of him. I sold it because managing a property 90 minutes away while working full-time was not practical, because grandmother left it to me to use wisely, and because the market was right. His situation had nothing to do with my decision. He said I was lying. He said I had always resented him, and this was just the cleanest way to punish him without looking like the bad guy. I said I did not resent him. I said I had spent most of my adult life quietly accepting a dynamic in our family that was not fair to either of us, and that this decision had nothing to do with him at all, which was precisely the point. He stood up fully at that. He said this was unbelievable. He said he had already told people he was making a move. He had told friends, a girl he was seeing, people in his life that he was turning things around, and now, because of me, he had nothing. I said he had had nothing before this conversation because the plan he had told people about was a plan built on my property without my permission. My mother started crying quietly. She said she did not understand why I could not just be generous. She said the house was going to sit there anyway. What was the difference? I told her the difference was that she was describing the disposition of my property as if I were not in the room, that I was 31 years old, that I had worked for everything I had without a safety net, and that grandmother had left the house to me specifically because she trusted me to make good decisions with it. Selling it was a good decision. Handing it over to solve a problem I had not created was not. My father asked if there was any way to undo the sale. He asked it with the reasonable tone of a man who does not want a conflict to continue and is looking for the practical exit. I said the sale was complete and legally binding, and that reversing it would mean suing myself out of a binding contract, losing significant fees, and potentially being liable to the buyers. And that even if none of that were true, my answer would be the same. My mother said she did not understand who I had become. I said I was the same person I had always been. I had just stopped pretending that certain things were not happening. My brother left before dessert. He did not say goodbye to me directly. He told my parents he would call them later and walked out with the rigid posture of someone performing dignity under pressure. The door closing behind him was not a slam, which almost made it worse somehow. A slam would have been honest. The quiet click was a performance. The three of us sat at the table with my grandmother's remaining estate paperwork spread between the pot roast and the bread basket. My father asked if I had used the money from the house to pay off debts. I said yes. I told him I had used part of it to pay off my remaining student loans, put a portion in a retirement account, and kept the rest in savings as an emergency fund. I told him that for the first time in my adult life I was not lying awake doing math at 2 a.m. Something crossed my father's face that was hard to read. He looked at the papers for a moment and then looked at me and said quietly that my grandmother would have been proud of that. My mother was still crying but softer now, the hot, urgent kind replaced by something more tired. I told them I loved them. I told them I was not trying to hurt my brother and I genuinely meant it. But I said I could not keep being the family member whose resources were treated as communal property simply because I had been the one willing to build them. I went home that night feeling wrung out and strangely settled at the same time. The next 2 weeks were predictably difficult. My brother sent a series of messages ranging from angry to wounded to aggressively casual, the last kind being the most unsettling because it suggested he was circling back to try a different approach. He asked if I could loan him enough for a deposit on an apartment. He said he would pay me back by the end of the year. He said it was not a big ask given what I had just walked away with. I told him I was not going to loan him money toward a housing situation that existed because of decisions he had made and I had not. He sent back a string of messages about how family is supposed to be there for each other. I said I agreed. I said family is supposed to be there for each other, which was why I had driven to Greensboro every few weeks to sit with our grandmother when she was sick, and why I had filed her taxes and handled her prescriptions and been present for the unglamorous, ordinary work of being someone's family. I said I had been there for her in the ways that actually mattered, and she had recognized that. He did not respond to that message. Extended family entered the picture around the 10-day mark, the way they always do in these situations, arriving with opinions in proportion to their distance from the actual events. My aunt called and told me the Greensboro house had been in the family for 40 years and that selling it to strangers was a betrayal of grandmother's memory. I asked her when she had last visited grandmother while she was alive. There was a pause. She said that was not the point. I said gently that I thought it actually was the point, that the house was left to me, not to the family at large, and that the person who left it had made that decision for reasons she shared with me personally. I said that if she felt strongly about supporting my brother's housing situation, I would love to give him her phone number because I was sure he would appreciate the help. She said that was not fair. I said I agreed that a lot of things in our family had not been fair, and that I was trying to change that by starting with my own decisions. She ended the call shortly after. A cousin sent a long text about how I had always been too focused on money and how not everything in life could be reduced to transactions. I read it twice, set my phone face down on my desk, and returned to the quarterly report I had been working on. 3 weeks after the dinner, my brother called me on a Tuesday evening. He asked if I had a few minutes. His voice was different, not the performed calm of someone circling toward a request, and not the hot edge of the messages he had been sending. It was quieter than both. He said he had found a room in a shared house in Raleigh. 2 other guys, both working, the rent split 3 ways into something he could manage on a part-time income while he looked for something steady. He said it was not what he had pictured, but it was something. He said the other guys seemed decent. I told him that sounded like a solid start. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he wanted to say something and asked if I would let him finish before responding. I said, okay. He said he had spent a lot of time being angry at me, and that he was starting to realize the anger was not really about me. That it was easier to be angry at someone who had made a decision than to sit with the fact that he had been building plans on a foundation he had not actually secured. He said it was a hard thing to admit, and that he was not totally sure he was past it yet. But he thought I should know. I did not say I told you so, though the words were available. I said I appreciated him telling me. I said I was not his enemy and had never been. I said I was rooting for him to figure it out because watching someone capable of more than they were doing is genuinely frustrating to witness. He gave a short, dry laugh and said he supposed he had that coming. I asked about the job search and he told me about a logistics company he had applied to that was hiring for a coordinator role. He said the pay was not great, but it was real and had room to grow if he performed. He said he was going to perform. I told him I believed him. I meant it more than I expected to. The situation with my parents took longer to fully settle. My mother in particular moved through several phases over the following month. First, there was hurt, the variety that expresses itself as pointed quiet and short responses on the phone. Then there was a period of what I can only describe as relitigation, where she would bring up new angles in conversation as if we were still negotiating something that had already been decided. Then, gradually, something shifted. About 6 weeks after the dinner, she called me on a Saturday morning and asked if I wanted to get lunch the next time I was in Raleigh. Not a family dinner, not an occasion. Just the two of us. We met at a restaurant she liked near their neighborhood. We ordered and talked about ordinary things for the first part of the meal. At some point, she set her fork down and said she wanted to say something without making a big production of it. She said she had been going back over things in her mind. Not just the house, but further back than that. She said she had always told herself that giving my brother extra support was just responding to his needs, and that I had never needed the same kind of help because I was capable. She said she was starting to understand that capable and okay are not the same thing. That, assuming I was fine because I managed, had maybe been a way of not looking too closely. I had not expected this conversation, and I felt the back of my throat do something complicated. I told her it meant a lot to hear her say that. She said she was not finished. She said she was also starting to see that the way she and my father had handled things with my brother over the years had not actually helped him. That removing every consequence had not made him stronger. It had made him unprepared for a world that was not going to keep cushioning his falls. She said watching him have to actually solve a problem for himself, watching him find that shared house and show up and make it work, had been both difficult and relieving in a way she had not anticipated. She said she thought I had done the right thing, even though it had not felt that way at the time. I reached across the table and held her hand for a moment. We did not say much after that, but the conversation had changed something between us. Not repaired everything, because some things take longer, but moved something that had been stuck. My brother started the logistics job 6 weeks after we talked on the phone. He texted me on his first day with a single message. Day 1. Wish me luck. I texted back. You do not need luck. You just need to show up every day. He sent a thumbs up emoji. It was the least sentimental exchange we had ever had and somehow one of the most meaningful. As the months passed, I watched the people around me slowly adjust to a new set of terms. My brother paid his share of rent every month in the shared house. My parents, without the option of redirecting my brother's problems toward me, found themselves actually engaging with his situation in direct ways, some practical, some emotional, and from what I could observe, more genuinely useful than years of financial rescue had ever been. My aunt eventually sent me a short message that was technically an apology, and I accepted it at face value because some things are better concluded than continued. For my own part, I found myself living with a spaciousness I had not known before. Not the spaciousness of having money, though the settled debt and the funded emergency account were real and significant. Something more than that. The particular lightness of not waiting for the next ask. Of not scanning every family communication for the shape of an incoming need. Of trusting that the boundaries I had held quietly, without drama, without ultimatums, had been worth holding. I have thought often about my grandmother and what she saw when she made the decision she made. I think she understood something about the difference between inheritance as gift and inheritance as trust. She did not leave me the house because she thought I deserved a reward. She left it to me because she believed I would make a decision that honored what it had taken to build something. And whatever you think about what I did, I believe I did exactly that. The couple who bought the house sent me a card a few months after closing. They said they had planted a garden along the back fence and that their dog had claimed the sunniest spot on the patio as his own. They said it felt like a place that had been well loved and that they intended to keep it that way. I read that card twice and kept it. If you have ever been the responsible one in your family, the one who figured things out, the one people assumed would absorb whatever needed absorbing, then you already know how this story felt from the inside. Not triumphant, not simple, just the long, complicated work of deciding what you owe yourself and then holding that line with enough steadiness that eventually, slowly, the people around you begin to find their own. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your experience in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear that holding your ground is not the same as being selfish, please share this with them. Like this video if you have ever had to be your own advocate when nobody else was going to do it for you. I will see you in the next one.